Hello. Uh, in the previous session, we talked about our agents, and we learned that our agent uh, takes observations from the environment. So this is our observation, and based on that observation, decides to choose an action, and after doing the action, it gets a reward signal, and it also gets another observation in the next time step. So this is the cycle that we talked about in the previous session. So and we learned that at each time step, T, as I said, our agent takes an action, observes the observation that is produced by the environment, and receives a reward signal. In turn, our environment takes an observation, takes an action, receives an action from our agent, produces our, the next observation, and also a reward signal for our agent. This is what we discussed in the previous session. Uh, so in this session, we are going to talk about state and history. So these are the main topics of this session. History is a sequence of observations, actions, and rewards. So whenever we talk about history, we mean all of the observations that we have received as an agent, all of the rewards that we have received, and all of the actions that we have decided to do in the environment. So if you put all of them together in time step T, all of the observations, rewards, and actions that we have seen in the previous steps up to time T will be our history. So, in other words, it is all of the observable variables up to time t. So, for example, the sensorimeter stream of a robot can be its history, uh, and what happens next in the environment, and also what our agent decides is based on the history. So based on the history, our agent can decide what he has to do, and environment again based on the history decide the observations and rewards that we receive. So all of interactions in a reinforcement learning environment is based on the history. And we define state as the information, used to determine what happens next. So formally, based on this definition, uh, state is any function of our history. So it is a really simple concept, but very consequential. So we have two types of states. The first one is the state of our environment. So uh, in time t is the environment private representation of environment private representation. So uh, whatever data it is, whatever data that our environment uses to pick up the next observation or reward. So it is internal for our environment, and we may or may not be aware of the state of the environment. So it might be visible to us, or it might not be visible to us. So depending on the problem that we are trying to solve, uh, we may have environment state, or we may have not it. So it really depends on the problem that we are trying to solve. And if we had environment state, it may have some irrelevant information that we don't need for solving the problem. Imagine a robot that is working in an environment, and the robot definitely, most definitely, will not need, the details how atoms interact with each other in the environment. So it is part of the environment state, but our robot will not need it. So most of the times there are some irrelevant information that in the environment state that we don't want to, uh, we don't want them. They are irrelevant. And the agent state. So we had environment state in the previous session, the previous slide. So we had environment state, and we have also the agent state. Agent state is the agent's eternal representation of the environment. So it is eternal for the eternal for internal for our agent, and it is whatever information that our agents use to pick up the next action. So it is internal for our agent, and as uh, you know, the ones that design these agents, it is our you know responsibility to design this state. So it is all of the information that is used by our reinforcement learning methods to decide what happens next in the environment and what action it chooses. And as you see here, our state, our agency state is a function of history, as we saw in the previous slide. So it can be any function, but depending on the problem that we are trying to solve, we will have different states for different problems. The next, topic that we are going to talk about is information state. An information state, or in other words, it is called Markov state, uh, contains all of the useful information that we need from history to pick up the next action. So, by definition, a state is called Markov if, based on the state, we can decide, you know, uh, what will be the next state. So the probability of the next state, given all of the history of states, is equal to probability of the next state only given the last state, the current state. So in other words, the future is independent of the past given the present. So if you have, the current state, you wouldn't need all of the previous states. So, the history of states would be S0, S1, S2, up until to ST. And you are trying to decide to know what would be the next state, ST plus 1. And if your state is Markov, you wouldn't need all of the previous states. And the only thing that you would need to determine, the next state is only the current state. So once we know the current state, we can throw away all of the history because we wouldn't need it to predict the next state. In other words, the state is sufficient statistic of the future. By definition, environment state is Markov, because we know that environment chooses the next state based on the current state. So by definition, it would be Markov. And also, if we choose all of the history, it would also be Markov again by definition. Okay, let's see an example of choosing, state, how we represent it in state. Let's say that we have a rat, uh, put yourself in position of a rat. Uh, our rat is in a cage, and it sees a light. Again, it sees a light for the second time. There is a lever. Uh, our rat pulls the lever. After pulling the lever, it hears a bell and it gets electrocuted. So after uh, these four observations, two uh, lights, one lever, and one bell, it gets electrocuted. In another observation, it hears the bell, it sees the light, it pulls a lever twice, and after that, it receives the cheese as a reward. So the first one was a negative reward, and the second one was a positive reward. And we've been asked to, guess what would happen in this sequence. So it sees a lever, it sees a light, it sees another lever, or in other words, it pulls the lever, it hears the bell, and what happens next? It gets electrocuted, a negative reward, or it gets a, a piece of cheese. It would be a positive reward if it got a piece of cheese. So which one it is? And you can pause the video here and think about it. What would you vote for? Being electrocuted or getting a cheese? Okay, I'm gonna pause for a moment and let you think about it. So let's see. Uh, it really depends on what you choose as your state. Let's say that you choose the last three items in your history as your state. If you do that, in the first case, let me clear this. In the first observation, if we look at the last three items in the list, you see a light bulb, you see a lever being pulled, and you see a bell. So after this observation, you get electrocuted, your rat gets electrocuted, and in the second observation, you see a light bulb being, a light bulb pulling the lever twice and getting a cheese. If you compare these, the third observation is identical to the first one. If you look at only the last three items, and as you see, if you choose your state uh, as the last three items, you would predict that your rat will get electrocuted. Another state could be count sublights and bells and levers. So you can count these. In the first observation, if you count, you have two light bulbs being, getting lit. You have one lever and you have a one bell. So after these observations, you get electrocuted. In the second one, you have one light bulb. You have two levers, and you have one bell. So after this observation, you get a positive reward of cheese. So let's see what is the third one. In the third one, you have one light bulb, as you see. Uh, you have two levers, and you have one bell. So it is identical to the second one. So you would get a cheese. You can predict that based on this state that you would get a cheese. And if you, think about the complete sequences, so you take all of the history as your state, then the third state is not identical to the first one or the second one. So you cannot tell anything based on the observations that you have had so far. So it is not identical to this one or this one. So you cannot make it this. So how you choose your, the method uh, that you choose your state is really affects how you see the environment and how you predict your next states. Okay, this was all that I wanted to talk about in this lecture, and I will see you in the next session.